Okay, so thanks for being here, and thank you to Omen and everyone for the opportunity to present this here. So I'm Fernando Lopez-Lezcano. I work at Stanford University, and I'm going to be talking about what happened during the pandemic to us, in a sense. And it's not just me. You should add all these names to the main core group that has been doing this. So before this started, we were having concerts without masks everywhere, happy. We had classes where we went in person without masks and learn about things. We had collaborations where we were able to do music without masks, and then you know what happened. So right after we went into lockdown in California and also in Germany, right after Henrik von Koller, who's at TU Berlin, asked Chris Chafe, COVID is having some effect. So he was thinking about a series of streaming concerts, right? So Henrik talked to Chris Chafe, who's the director of Karma at Stanford. Chris talked to Juan Parra, who is in Europe, to Konstantin Basica, to myself. Henrik talked to Klaus, and we decided to do something, and the location is 3 of us in California, 2 in Berlin, and 1 in Ghent, Belgium. So geographically dispersed. At the very beginning, we said, how are we going to do this? So the audio exchange between performers is going to be using Jacktrip. So I'm not going to talk in detail about Jacktrip, but we'll talk about it a little bit. The video part, because we also wanted this presence to be visual, we started using Zoom, as probably everybody here, and eventually we switched to a different combination of Jitsi, which is an open source version of something similar to Zoom, and OBS for editing the video. And the streaming platform, we started with YouTube, and then we switched to Vimeo. And the first public performance happened, as you can see, at the beginning of the lockdown. So this was April of 2020, and this is what we looked like performing that particular session. So we started doing this regular concerts, 1 hour long duration. The core group of 6 performers that I mentioned before, many invited guests, either musicians or visual artists that would do, for example, painting in real time, inspired by the noises we were making, and this was all being transmitted through video as well. And we have been doing this for the duration of the pandemic and beyond. So the last concert was at the end of October, and it was number 105. So somewhere we have stored 105 hours of music that you can access. This is all archived in Vimeo. And 1 record release, which was organized by Chris Chafe and embodies one of the sessions. I believe it's session number 87 that he liked, and it has been released, and you have the link there. Not in this talk is Konstantin Basica's amazing video work in streaming the visual part of the quarantine sessions, as they came to be known. And he's using a mixture of Chromium plus a plugin that's called Pop-Up Jitsi, which enables to select individual feeds from the performers coming from Jitsi, this meeting server, and stream them and mix them in OBS, which is an open source, again, video mixer. And it goes from crazy things like this. So this is, you might be able to piece the performers in between this highly processed video stream, and we're all there, to something a little more subdued. So this is number 48, to something really aesthetic like this, which is number 105, where we're, in this case with 3 guests performing with us. So problems. As soon as we are, what do you need?
the presentation, the video.
Oh,
is it connected? Yes.
I'm connected. Yeah. Maybe not the right one. Oh, okay. So the problems. Right away, we said mono is not enough to properly present 6 or 10, up to 10 performers over a connection. Home internet was instantly a problem, so we were all in our places, and some of us were fine. Some of us had insane problems. I was one of them. I couldn't almost not perform at the beginning, and I could speak for an hour about just that. Hard audio clipping, so maintaining a mix where that can't happen, that was a problem right away. How to keep a dynamic range that is reasonable in the final mix. And finally, trying to create a sonic shared space where all the performers are kind of virtually located so that they're glued together, you know, in terms of the audio scene that's been broadcast. The software evolution, I'm going to just outline it very briefly. We started using Jacktrip in hub mode, just Jacktrip itself. Then we added some Super Collider software that was being written by Henrik von Koller. I added more code to that. And eventually, I moved to some software I had been using right before the pandemic to do performances, which was called Super Loopy, which was a multiple asynchronous looper that had some processing happening inside of them. And I transformed that to also be a mixer for the performance. And many changes over time, and it's currently being controlled through one of these fader boxes, the Behringer X-Touch, the simplest one. So this is where things are happening. So the 3 green squares are at Karma, at the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, Computer Music, at Stanford. And there's 3 computers involved. One of them, the one that says Computer at Karma, is a big Linux workstation that's acting as the audio processing workstation for the whole performance. The one below, the one that says Mac at Karma, is the one that's taking care of the video processing, and Konstantin is working with that. And I set up our own instance of Jitsi in one of our servers, so we could have complete control of it and modify it, configure it so it uses the best possible video bandwidth and all that. So you can see also the different performers are running Jacktrip in their home setup. They're also connected with some camera to Jitsi, but they're all going into this audio processing computer. One special case is Konstantin, which is also connecting to the video processing computer so that he's managing that. And another special case is my computer, which is also connected to the main audio processing computer. I'm using Super Collider, and if you know about Super Collider, the language itself runs separate from the audio engine. So the language and all the GUI and interface is running in my home computer, but the audio processing is running in the remote computer at Karma, and there's a TCP link with OSC messages that links both, and it works out. And then that computer is also connecting to this Jacktrip here. The audio stream which I'm sending is mixed and delayed in OBS, and that's what's being sent to the streamings where there can be a live audience listening to the concert with a few seconds delay, of course. So the software that I'm running, which is what I'm going to be briefly talking about, has kind of this block diagram. Almost all of it is running inside Super Collider with this program that I'm still developing. It has 16 possible input channels, so we could potentially have up to 16 performers running at the same time. I think the max we did was 12 at some point. It has the loopers, which are kind of optional, but I have been using them in performance. And then it has, the whole thing is mixed in ambisonics, in fourth order ambisonics. If you know about it, it's a format that enables you to describe a sound field. Everything, the spatialization of the sound is done in ambisonics, and then it's decoded to binaural, and then it's mastered in real time, and that's the stream that goes out. So a stream that goes out is 2 channels which are mastered and represent the full sound field in binaural format. I'm also capturing the full ambisonics mix in an external recorder, and this is what I look at when a session is happening. So inputs, loopers, global and individual controls, metering. You can see here these little arrows are pointing to where the stereo sources are coming from, and they can do, and we'll see they do dynamic panning also of the performance, so that the mix is not a static, but it changes over time. So if we zoom into the hub server, we're using a patched version of JackTrip that automatically connects the performers to the proper inputs and outputs of Super Collider, right? So nothing happens inside JackTrip except transporting samples to and from the performers. The mixing of the final mix happens in Super Collider. So JackTrip uses Jack, which is a sound server, to do connections, and Super Collider also uses Jack to do its own connections. And what has to happen is when a new performer connects, there's going to be ports that appear in Jack that need to be connected automatically, and that's happening inside JackTrip with this patch that I wrote, which is pretty simple. Another highlight I wanted to make is for the binaural decoder, which is also running inside Super Collider. I used code based on SCHOA, which is a quark written by Florian Grond, based on work by Pierre Lecomte and others. And after a lot of experimentation, and again, this could be a long talk if I talked about all the details, I found that this particular set of HRTFs for binaural listening were pretty good. They gave a very wide image of what's happening, and it's using the old SETI database subject number 2, which is a Newman virtual, head. And of course, the experience will be different for different listeners, because it depends on the shape of your, little chunk of meat here that if you look around, you'll see everyone is different. So this one works very well for me, and the other core performers were also happy, so that's good. Another very important part is this little chunk here that says Master Me. And that's Klaus Schermann, which is one of the 6 core members of our performance group. At the very beginning said, oh, well, I could write something to do, real-time mastering, because he has been a mastering engineer for a long time. And he did write something called Master Me, which is written in Faust, and it's available in GitHub, and it has been an amazing resource, because it maintains a proper LUFS, loudness unit relative to full scale, for the whole performance that is stable. It preserves dynamic range. It avoids clipping. It looks like this. The latest version, if you run it standalone, has a GUI, It looks like this in simple mode. You just set your target LUFS and off you go. Or you can go into expert mode and tweak everything. And it's a very, very good mastering system that works in real time, doesn't add latency. And it keeps, it solves one of these problems that we had, which is both dynamic range and clipping at the mix stage, maintaining that under control. So it can be compiled to pretty much everything, and I'm using it compiled as SuperCollider EUGen, which I incorporate inside the program that I'm running. So the solutions that happened during the course of this past 2.5 years is, for mono is not enough. We now can send, each performance can send a stereo feed. Each feed is mixed actually into a audio scene using 3D full surround ambisonics. The feeds can be assigned initial directions and stereo width. And the SuperCollider program also has some mostly level triggered automatic panning functions where the sources change position in interesting ways, I hope, when there's new onsets, for example, or when there's a silence. And that's part of the instruments that I have been developing that is inside the SuperCollider program. For the problem of hard limiting and clipping, at the source, meaning each client, Julius Smith at Karma wrote a set of Faust jack trip plugins that includes a limiter. So the performers can activate that so that there's no clipping on their end, right? And that has been very useful. All those samples are going to be transferred to the main jack trip mixing hub, and eventually they make it out to this mastering station where you have a reasonable level, maintain dynamic range, and avoid any sort of clipping. And of course, Klaus wrote Master Me. That's the important part. As to the question of shared space, I added ambisonics reverberators, and that helps a lot in gluing all the performers together, right? And furthermore, I have used sometimes reverb as a creative tool during the performance because I can change the virtual space in which the mix is happening in real time. As for the latency problem, well, there's latency due to geographical locations, and that's unavoidable. But a lot of optimization has happened inside jack trip itself during the past 2.5 years, and that would be another talk, to have, because a lot has happened, and for the better, and it's a great tool. At the beginning of our sessions, we had to run with 1,000 sample buffers. Right now, the main server is running on 128, so that gives you an idea of progress that has happened. And the bonus has been also the incorporation of this Super Loopy program that I was developing before, where we get asynchronous loopers that I can use during the performance to capture some of the performance and then present these materials again later during the performance. So sometimes I use it a lot, sometimes none at all. It depends on what's happening in that particular session. Still to be solved, internet home connections are much better than before, but there are still instances of dropped packets causing glitches, and Chris Chafe is actually doing work in concealing those things. So instead of repeating something, or instead of getting a little bit of silence and a glitch, he's merging in surrounding samples, trying to hide it, and it's becoming very, very effective. Still to be solved. Well, this is a difficult problem. How to keep a wide dynamic range in the final stream. Some performers, especially guests, tend to send already compressed streams, and that's a problem. You get into a loudness war, and it doesn't work. The solutions, I don't know. I mean, this one I like better. Educate performers. Tell them, no, don't do that. But sometimes we do a sound check at the beginning. What's the loudest you're sending? And you get something. And then during the performance, you get a lot more, and it's like flat. So it is a problem. And still to do, the fact that we're using a patch jack trip can be solved. I did some tests. You can do that from inside Super Collider and Supernova, so that you could run with a jack trip that's stock, plus the Super Collider program. But there's problems also. So if Konstantin is not available, where's the video coming from? Because he does the magic for that. Or if I'm not available, where does the audio processing come from? And we have found solutions for that. Not optimal, but that's it. And we have been working for this 2.5 years, and it has helped keep us sane during the pandemic. And I will very much regret when we stop doing it. It's not as often now as it was before, because people start having so-called lives, and they're busy, but we'll try to keep it going for as long as we can. And all of this is archived in Vimeo. If you go to our website and look for past performances, there should be links to the video and audio. And that's it. Any questions? Or any answers, that'd be even better.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It's very interesting. I'm really interested in this area. I've been following it for a long time. Kind of the prospect of online collaboration for musical performances. And it seemed during the pandemic there was a number of different attempts to do it. In your instance, are people playing acoustic instruments simultaneously?
Yeah, what is being played, it depends on the mix of performers at the moment. So the 6 members of the core group, I do electronics mostly and some stage piano. Chris Chafe plays his celletto, which is a cello which is hollow and electronic and sends the individual strings, all the 4 strings, or a dilruba or other instruments he has. Klaus is electronics. Juan Parra is electric guitar and processing and modular. Henrik von Koller is doing a bunch of things. He has some very old oscillators. He has some objects and contact mics that he manipulates, and he has a special controller. Guests have played everything. So acoustic instruments, trumpets, guitars, and they all interact at the same time. And we play music that can be played with the latency we have.
I understand. Yeah, that was kind of my next question. So I presume it's kind of an improvisational jazz kind of thing where you're not all trying to land on a chorus or on a beat.
Sometimes it happens that we have a pulse going and we are able to sing. Sometimes not. It's free. Sometimes before the session we say, well, what shall we do? Especially if we have guests, and we say, okay, we start and then we shut up after 2 minutes, and you, the guests, will have a solo for 5 minutes, and then we start coming in at different times. Sometimes we don't say anything and we just go for it. We have, after 100 performances, we have some sort of understanding, and we react, and we're all of us were listening to what's happening and reacting in real time. But of course it's not pulse-based music, it's whatever can be played, and it depends on what the performer is. Especially the guys in Europe, have a hard time because our server is in the United States. But like, pipe organ players, you can get used to playing things with some lag. It's not ideal, but I mean, unless one of you guys have a solution for the speed of light problem.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Just if you don't mind as well, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on why, let's say, the music collaboration on the internet like that hasn't taken off really in the broader sense. What do you think are the main obstacles?
Well, in a sense, it has taken off compared to before the pandemic. So a lot of groups are collaborating over the internet where this was not happening before. There's a human aspect of being in the same room and performing with other musicians that is diluted a little bit when you do a remote performance. There's also still a technological barrier, a price of entry into the club, because you have to master a few things which are not very difficult, but there's so many things that can fail or not be optimal. You have to have everything, and sometimes it's something as silly as suddenly we can't figure out how to turn off local feedback in the computer that the guest is using, or sound doesn't come out, and it's because there's some routing in the local chain in the home of the performer. Something is not routed correctly, and sometimes it's difficult to figure things out because of the many types of systems and software that people use.
Okay, thank you.
I think it was first.
You spoke about how you send audio to the server on the streaming service, but I know that on stage musicians like to and need to have feedback of other musicians. So how you working with this?
The audio that is sent to the audience through streaming is exactly the same audio that is being sent to all the performers. So the performers don't, some other software has the ability to do a local mix, for example, that's different from the one that's been broadcast. In our case, we are listening to the final output. So everyone knows what his or her contribution to the mix is at a given time. So I guess that's the glue that gets everyone together. That can be a problem sometimes. If we get guests that are not used to performing with any latency at all. And we don't currently have, I was working on a solution to try to change that so that selected performers would not receive themselves mixed in the final mix, right? So that they can have their local monitoring to hear themselves without latency. But it defeats the purpose in a way. Because the purpose is that you listen to the final mix, you are in the same room, basically. I don't know if that answers the...
So just while we take the next question, Nando, can you unplug your computer so that Maxime can
of course.
Can connect? And,
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, my question was kind of related to the previous one on local monitoring, because it's something that I have seen that, yeah, you are using binaural decoders, because I guess you are, they are all with headphones, right?
Most of us use headphones.
Yeah. Is there any, when you play, for example, electronics, and then you have local monitoring with the speakers, how have you dealt with the issue of having feedback or, you know, delayed version?
Yeah, I don't use speakers. I always perform with headphones. I think Chris Chafe uses speakers, and he's fine. I'm not sure. Okay, Henrik and Klaus. I think they're all the guys in Europe use headphones, so they don't have that kind of problem.
And just 1 second, have you thought of implementing, for example, impulse-response convolutions for adding, instead of reverb, a real feeling of a room?
No, that's part of what we do. So I have an impulse-response real-time convolver, partition convolver, that is ambisonics. So it's proper reverb that's being mixed into this, and there's two reverb units, one which is a feedback delay network reverb, artificial, and the other one is convolution. And I've been using a modified version of an impulse response of the York Minster in England that's published, that's first order ambisonics, and that works very well. I like it. And sometimes I crank it up, and suddenly we're in this huge space.
Thank you.
And that really helps to put everyone in one place, which is one of the problems with this. And I think we should move on to, you can ask any more questions later.